My name is Jeff Puma. I am the Director of Marketing and Communications for AME. I'm joined today by our Events Registration Coordinator, Laura Coninger, who is behind the scenes to help moderate the Q&A and make sure everything goes smoothly during our webinar. Our webinar today is 12 Vital Actions to Restart and Reset Your Business. And it is my honor to introduce our speaker, Michael Bremer. Michael is the retired president of the Cumberland Group, a past national board member of AME, and the author of several books on performance improvement, including the Shingo award-winning How to Do a Gemba Walk. Michael serves as the lead for AME's Excellence Award Council and was AME's 2019 McCulloch Lifetime Achievement Award recipient. Before we start, just a few housekeeping items. You'll be muted throughout the webinar. However, we do encourage you to put any questions into the Q&A box. We'll be moderating that throughout the conversation and take your questions as they come in. Now, I'm pleased to introduce Michael Bremer.
Thanks a lot, Jeff, and thank you everybody that for joining us today to do this. I appreciate your taking time to join us. I wrote this article for AME. It was published in Target Magazine. Must have been a couple months ago. It seems like a lifetime ago. That at this point, with everything that it is that's going on, but it's really a crazy time. Certainly unlike anything that I've ever experienced in my life, and I'm assuming that it's the same for you and your organization. And what's going to be happening, pretty obviously, is some businesses are going to cease to exist simply due to the nature of the business they're in. I mean, it's a challenge for restaurants. It's a challenge for anybody in the beauty and in the beauty industry. A lot of organizations, if they really didn't have enough cash in the bank, it's going to be a challenge to survive. Others will really cease to survive because of decisions that are being made by the leadership teams. And others are really going to prosper because there are some unique opportunities, and I believe, and I'll come back to this idea, I think there's a window of opportunity that's open maybe for another 6 months for us to be making some radical changes in the way we operate inside of our organizations. And I'll be talking a lot about the mindset, the way we think about this stuff and the way we execute. I will be discussing these 12 key actions, but one of the things that I didn't think about when I wrote the article, if I can get my slides to change here, is the values, the mission statements that most organizations have. And really one of the things I should have put in that article is any decision that you're making right now, I suggest you go back and you look at the values, that the mission of your organization, your purpose, why it is that you say you exist, whatever those powerful things are that you're using that sends a message to the community, to your customers, and most importantly to your employees about what is the purpose of our organization. And what I suggest you do is every big decision that it is that you're making, and every one of the 12 vital actions that I'll be talking about, you filter those through your values, filter those through your purpose, your reason why, and are you making decisions that are consistent with what you claim to be your values? Because now is when we're really challenged to live those values. I mean, it's easy to live the values more or less when things are going well, but when they're not going well, like today, I think you'll be making better decisions if you can really go back to that and say, does this decision fit with what we claim to be our reality, our truth? If you find you're violating that, then anything that it is that you're telling your people as you try to make these changes, they're going to question the credibility of it, the reliability of it. So if for some reason the decisions that you're making are inconsistent with your values, with your purpose, you better have a really good explanation as to why you've got this conflict and what are you going to do to get these things in alignment. Are you going to change the values, or are you going to change some of the decisions that it is that you're making? But just going back to that all by itself and consciously thinking about it, because often we write these things and we don't go back to them, can provide a lot of power and a lot of positiveness for the changes that it is you're trying to make. As you're making some of these decisions, you can go back and reference those as to why we're doing what it is we're doing. So as Jeff mentioned, we'll talk about 12 things. I'm going to shift. I've done a couple of webinars on this. And a lot of my initial focus was on restarting, but I'm going to assume that everybody that's here has restarted and that you've been doing it for a while now. I was surprised how many businesses were able to claim themselves as being vital and continue to operate pretty much the whole time, although typically with a lower workforce, lower staffing. But what I want to focus mostly on as I talk about these things today is the idea of resetting. That this window of opportunity that's probably open for another 6 months. And then at that point, the new norm of some sort is going to have settled back in, and it's going to be more difficult to go back and start to make some of the changes that we'll discuss. So let's get into it. The first thing, it's true for any business. It's not just true during this business, but getting the basics right. And what are some of the most important decisions that we're making at several levels? What are the most important decisions at an organization level? What are the most important decisions if I'm a department leader? What are some of the most important decisions if I'm a team leader? And hopefully we're driving some alignment between those. The idea of strategic policy deployment, or if you use some of the Japanese words, Hoshin planning, Hoshin deployment. Am I getting alignment? And do we really know what the key decisions are that we need to be working toward? And are we communicating them in a way that people understand and buy into? And I won't use a whole lot of words from the lean world, but catchball is one of them. And one big difference between some of the top down planning that's being done today versus 30 years ago, when management by objective was very popular, is the idea of this thing called catchball. And so as we come up with these key decisions for the organization, are we discussing those with the next level, the next couple levels down, to make certain that people understand what it is we're talking about and they're buying into what it is that's going on. And the trick today is I've got key important decisions that I'm probably making over a 7-day period, over a 30-day period, and long-term planning at this point in time, I typically like to think of as a 5-year period, but in today's world, it's probably 12 to 18 months because there are so many unknowns out there and things that we're all figuring out. And so in your weekly meetings, what are the key decisions that it is that we're going to be making, for this coming week? Those things that we wanted to be working on over a 30-day period, making certain that is clear. People understand what that is, what those priorities are. And as we go through and we learn, that people understand the adjustments that we're making along the way and why we're making those. But that's one of the most important basic things that it is we need to be doing in the current environment. One of the tools that I traditionally used, or we used a lot in our consulting practice when we were doing that, is this idea of a complexity analysis. And I'll explain this picture a little bit. Originally, I was talking about this is something you could use for looking at the new safety protocols that you could be doing. But I think we could also be using this. Let's say that you want to accelerate the organization's rate of innovation. What are some of the key support systems that would be important to innovation? Well, maybe we need some mentoring capabilities. What is our experimental criteria going to be for doing an innovation project or launching an innovation idea? From a support systems perspective, how are we going to prioritize time? How are we going to allow people to innovate? How are we going to get customer feedback? The idea of rapid prototyping, if you're looking at some of the things that new startups do, those could all be support system key actions that are on the left-hand side of this graph. And as I look at the top, what are the support departments that are involved in doing that? Or there could even be a system there as well, like training. This particular graphic was a project that we did years ago with an organization that had been downsizing for many years. And the corporation was now bringing back some production lines from elsewhere around the globe and putting them in this facility. And this facility was really good at cost reduction and really good at downsizing. but the whole mental mindset that they needed to do some upsizing and upscaling really required a different mental way of operating. And so what we were looking for this particular organization, where we had who are the departments at the top, what were their key action steps, and I purposely excluded them from this picture. And then you wanted to go to the middle, what are the interactions, what are the connections? If you're looking at some challenging things for your organization to be doing today, some key large things that it is you want to deploy or changes you want to make, I'm certain if you do some Google research on complexity analysis, you could find some things like this. Although we kind of, so far as I know, we created this particular model and way of doing it. Or if you got a question on it, feel free to email me later, and I'll be happy to talk to you. It's just a neat way for us to identify the key potential issues, determine what the priorities of those issues are. And in this particular operation, one of the big things we learned is they were operating at a very slow speed. There was not a lot of rapid things that were happening in this organization, and so things needed to get much more crisp. They needed to be moving faster. There was a lot of work that the support departments, quality assurance group being one of them, needed to be doing to be much more in alignment for making decisions faster than they were used to. And so it really, this ended up resulting in quite a few changes to the way this organization was operating. And it could be relevant today as we're going through and you're making changes in your organizations. The next, kind of staying within getting the basics right, so still that first vital action. I'm going to just focus on two things. I want to talk about standard work practices and meaningful visual feedback. And those are relevant. They're relevant today, but they're really relevant at any point in time. I probably could have spent the entire hour just talking about each of these two yellow blocks, but let's get into it. So the idea of standard work, this is something I thought that I understood when I first started working in the world of performance improvement, and I'm kind of embarrassed to admit that was all the way back in the 1980s. And at that point in time, my thoughts on standard work was simply that's a bunch of procedures that we have for the way people are supposed to do things. And the way that people then, and I think for many years, they kind of looked at that as a tedious thing. That here's this tedium thing that's here, it's in the computer. It doesn't really have a whole lot of life. And typically, what we still found, we just closed down our consulting operation a couple of years ago. We'd still run into this problem where people didn't keep their records up to date. Standard work is really, again, it's another thing that's going on in our heads. What is our mindset about what standard work should be? And really, if you look at what Duran said, Dr. Duran, in this instance, without a standard, there's no logical basis for decision making. Taiichi Ono from Toyota said something very similar, and Dr. W. Edward Deming, who I spent time with in the 80s, again, voiced something very similar, that without the standard, you really can't tell if you're making a solid improvement. The other idea of that is standard is really, it really should be, what's our best practice for doing this activity? It doesn't matter if it's software development or project management, or I'm doing some task in a manufacturing floor. What's our best activity for doing this? And do we really, from a mind perspective, do we perceive this as simply, this is an experiment, this is the best way we know how to do this now, but we are always interested in finding a better way to be able to do this? If I operate this in the world of where, well, this is standard thing is there and it's just kind of a dead thing, that's going to cause that's going to be one culture. And if I'm operating over here where our mindset is, this is simply the best way we know how to do this at the moment, and we are always interested in finding a better way to do it, the culture in that organization is going to be really radically different. And so the neat thing for us today is, I'm guessing still that you're working at a slower pace today than you were working 4 months ago. There's just a lot of things that have slowed down for the way that it is that we're doing work. And so it might be a neat opportunity to go back and look at what is the way that we're doing this work today. Are we keeping our records up to date for what the best known way for doing this particular activity is today? And are we finding ways to hold ourselves accountable for doing that in a consistent basis over and over again? It's such an important foundation for effective improvement practices, and people will often overlook, I think, the power that's there because they assume it's something simple. I wanted to mention this too. The idea of kind of going into visuals, here's a simple one. One of the things that you might want to do with looking at the way that you manage standard work is, what are things we should keep doing? What are things we should stop doing? And what are things we should start doing? And just do some simple feedback with Post-its. And one place where I've seen this used pretty neat was a company that they were trying to get some standard work activities for leaders. In the lean world, leader standard work is a very common thing. And what they found they were doing with their standard work practices, it was really sort of a meeting management and an activity list for what I, as a leader, needed to be doing on a daily basis. And when they went through and they did this simple analysis, one of the people said, well, really, aren't there some new behaviors that we want to be practicing as leaders? Aren't there some things that I want to change relative to the way that it is that I'm leading my team? And when they said that, they made a shift in the way that they were doing leader standard work to focusing. It was individually. So the behaviors that I might want to focus on as a leader might differ from something that you're doing. But are we doing that? And the neat thing, the power that came out of that, using this simple analysis, was I think on a monthly basis, they were going back to say, well, how well are we doing on this new way that is we want to be doing leader standard work? And over the next year, they were able to significantly increase the effectiveness of another tool that often gets underutilized because people look at it as an activity list of here's my task list for the day, rather than here's the way I want to make changes so that I become a more effective leader. The next thing to spend a little bit of time on, because it's so powerful, and I think in many ways the glue that can hold the changes that it is that we're trying to make together, it is our visual reporting practices. I'm certain restaurants are all now starting to open. This particular picture came from an article in Planet Lean where they talked about reimagining restaurants. And restaurants are not, they're not a place that have typically used lean activities. Jeff, I see there's somebody else wanting to come into the room. Maybe I see a one up here. I'm assuming that's a new entrant. But but what are things that it is that we can be doing to make these communications, fast and simple and meaningful? So again, that idea of what are our boards doing to motivate behavior changes focused on improvement? So one of the things Jeff mentioned is that I'm the leader of AME's Excellence Award Council. And I'll share a couple of examples of these during the talk, but when I'm in a plant and I go and I look, everybody's got, anywhere where we go to a site visit, they've got key performance indicators with safety, quality, delivery, productivity or cost, some type of thing that's on there. Well, once again, though, more often than not, these things are simply activity boards. Did we have any quality problems? If there was a quality problem, something gets shown to deal with that problem. If there was a delivery issue or getting something done on time, something might be there. But what can I use that board to really drive behaviors? What are the things that I would really like for our employees to be doing? One of the things that I was so impressed when I did a visit at an automotive supplier in Utah years ago was one of the things they had on their board wasn't just the problem of the day that was identified on this board, but what was the team doing to take time out of the process moving forward for tomorrow. So they were looking at it more from a process perspective. And they said, so when I asked them, what are you going to be doing a month from now differently? They could show the time that they were planning to take out of their work activity, the projects that they were working on to save that time. And so it begins again to get into the head of the way that it is we're doing work rather than just managing the activities of the moment. This one came from a company, and I love the simplicity of this visual. They should provide meaningful feedback, meaning that I'm going to do something different as a result of seeing this thing. And I love the simplicity of this one. This company had been doing some work to reduce, what was it? The not a safety issue. I've lost the word here. I wanted to avoid ergonomic stress. Sorry. So I wanted to avoid ergonomic stress as I was doing this. And so they're identifying things that cause stress that, that could ultimately result in an injury. So they're trying to get ahead of the game. And what they had identified was, what are the problems we had this year? What are the problems that we had last year? And they had those just in this, it was kind of a flip chart size sheet of paper. And they had more cells than are shown here in this diagram. And then they showed what cells had some problems last year, what had some cells this year. And this thing was posted right by the main entrance to the factory from the office. And when people walk through there, they could look at this chart. And if I happen to be walking by cell A or by cell F as I'm out doing something, I was thinking about this because I just saw it. And I could look to see, well, are they doing a good job of reducing the things that we've identified as stress for this year? Are the changes that we made from last year, have those been maintained? And the thing I love about this is you could do something as simple as this for a multi-skilling of employees, how many people have been trained. I could do this for effective practice of standard work activities. I mean, anything that it is that we want to be focusing on to get better at doing over the next year. If I could come up with something simple like this, just to raise my conscious level of what it is that's going on, it can be extremely powerful. And so it was so simple, but they were using it in such a great way. And people were, in fact, using these things when they went out to the cell to look at it, which is the key. The other one that I want to touch on, I'll make this a short story because it could be long, but if you go into the administrative side of an organization, the work that engineering is doing, the work that the sales force is doing, it's very difficult to see how much capacity does that group have for being able to do work. Because typically what they've got is they've got a lot of work activities that they're doing. When I can't move a particular activity forward, I've got other things sitting there in the queue waiting for my attention, and I can just pick those up. And so this one came from a manufacturing company in the Chicago area. A young engineer, Jordan, simply wanted to get a handle. What this company did is they sold a product, 70% of their sales were customized versions of the product. And so sales would send a request for proposal into the design engineering department and say, tell me how much this would cost and when could we make it, for this customer. And Jordan was interested in how much capacity does the design engineering group have for being able to do work. And let's just keep it simple. Let's say there were 5 engineers in this department, and each of those engineers could be working on 5 requests for proposals at any given point in time. He vetted that. He shared that with sales. He shared that idea that we think we can do 5 with manufacturing. Everybody said, yeah, that sounds like a reasonable number. And what they started to do with this board is twice a week, the sales, design engineering, purchasing, and manufacturing would come in, and they would look at this board and simply look at the projects that are there in the queue, what's coming up. Purchasing would get some alerts on things they needed to be getting bids on because they needed to get bids for component parts, and manufacturing would often be involved in doing prototypes, so they had some idea of what was going on. But when you've got a visual board that is really clicking and really working, what these boards do is they change behaviors. And so one of the things you could do is I suggest you look at every visual board you're using and you ask yourself the question, is this visual board changing our behaviors to act in a more productive, a more effective way? And what happened with this particular one is sales is in there looking at this. And this organization was winning about 33% of its requests for proposals. And this has been going on for a long time, so it was sort of accepted as the norm. We win these things as a third of the time. But when I'm confronted with this visually, and I'm looking at this twice a week, they're coming in there to do these meetings, and I see this board. So the facts are now displayed right there in front of me. And if sales comes in with request for proposal number 26, the one thing I can do right now is I can have a more honest conversation. And so sales has got, I've got request for proposal here number 26, and Jordan can look at sales and say, we're happy to do that. Just tell me which of these 25 you want to take out and insert that in its place. And so the one behavior that was changed there is it made a better dialogue, a better communication between these departments on what it is that we should be working on. The other thing that happened was kind of magical and pretty unintended. But sales is now looking at this board, and I'm confronted with this visual fact that we're only winning these things 1/3 of the time. And if we're winning these things just 1/3 of the time, that means 2/3 of the time, design engineering is wasting their time working on a proposal. But the old mental model was, if I'm in sales and I'm out talking to somebody in the field and I've got an opportunity to sell something, this is a great idea. I grab it, then I take it, then I want to get it into the queue. Well, now that I'm confronted with this and we're talking about it, even though I sort of knew from reports this was going on, it's not the same as this picture. And what ended up happening is sales over the next 10 months began to do a better job of vetting the proposals that they were throwing into the mix. And they ended up as an organization increasing their win rate with no process changes, with nobody telling anybody to do anything differently. They went from winning 33% of their proposals to winning more than 60% of their proposals. And what sales started to do was do a better job of vetting what goes in there. One of the things they found was a third of the time that their customers are simply looking for a competitive bid for somebody else that they were already planning to work with. And if the salesperson had dug a little bit more deeply, they probably would have been able to find that out. And so they just started doing some scrubbing and cleanup of what went in. And it's amazing. And so I suggest, excuse me, take a look at your boards. And are these boards doing anything to drive more productive behaviors? This is all just within the world of getting the basics right. The next big thing is communications. We all talk about this stuff. We know that communications are critical, but why are we doing it? Well, probably doing the communications to drive connections within the organization. Just like I talked about with sales and design engineering, we want these departments to be able to work more effectively, more closely together. We want people to understand why we're doing what we're doing. Typically, if I send the message out, I don't know if the message has been received appropriately, properly or not, that people really understand it. So I want some discussion to be taking place after we've done the communication. And then really what I want to be doing as the initial communicator is I want to listen. I want to listen to that discussion. What is it that people are saying? So that in today's world, as we're all going through and changing our safety protocols, one of the things that we're finding in public is some people will wear a mask, some people decide for whatever reasons that they don't want to wear a mask. If I've got these sorts of dialogues going in about the protocols, the safety protocols inside my business, I want to be listening and hearing what it is that's happening so we can begin to improve our communications to let people know the reason why we're doing this. I just saw a post from Mark Graban this morning on LinkedIn in the flight attendant on a flight that he was on. The attendant said, "I'm wearing my mask in order to protect you." The message being that, and then, I guess she went on to say, then I hope you'll wear your mask to protect me and the other passengers on this plane. And so doing some things to let people know the why of what it is we're doing as I hear this can be powerful. The other thing there is just so many of us have different people that their native language is something other than English. Some organizations, there's OC Tanner in Utah, I think has 40 different languages, if you can imagine that. And so where I've got these, what are the ways that it is that we're communicating so that people that English might not be their native language, they can also understand what it is that's going on. The pictures, the visual communications can come back and help that because there's no words that are involved. But do I need to be communicating some of these things about hygiene, hand washing, making it easy to social distance in multiple languages to make it easier for people in the organization to hear what's going on and comply? And all of this, of course, is being done to build the team to bring us together. So once again, going back and evaluating even that complexity matrix that I talked about earlier, if I was just looking at the effectiveness of our communications, who are the departments, who are the people that are involved in making that happen? What are our support systems for doing the communications? Are there things that it is that we could be doing to improve the way we're doing that more effectively? There was a neat thing that the Kroger grocery company shared. It's a grocery chain largely based in the East and Midwest. But if you do a Google search, you can find this. They shared what they've learned as a blueprint for business. And the neat thing in that blueprint is it talked about manufacturing operations, distribution operations, and of course their retail stores. And they just made that publicly available. I think it runs about 17 pages. And so if you simply wanted to look at what some other company has done for suggesting these protocols, in this case, it was for starting up, but going and taking a look at that, they talked a lot about communications within that. That whole idea that many of us have heard that if the student hasn't learned, the teacher hasn't taught. Well, it's the same thing here. I mean, if this message that I'm trying to communicate that people have not heard that, that's not their problem. It's I need to make some changes to the way that it is that I'm communicating. And one of the things that I thought Kroger talked about that was very powerful was really being honest with our team members, that it's okay not to know all of the answers, but our employees need to know that we're absolutely there to support them. And the best way they're going to know that is not through the words that it is that we're saying, but through the actions that it is that we're doing. Are we really following, is my leadership team obeying all of the safety protocols that it is that we want to be doing today when they're in our plant or they're in the call center, or if it's a retail outlet, when they're in the retail outlet and going through that, are they telling us we should be doing one thing and they're over here doing something else? I think our behaviors, our actions are one of the most powerful means of communicating, because do we really believe what it is we're saying? Goes all the way back to that idea that we talked about with the values and the purpose of our organization. Are we really behaving in a way that's consistent with that? What's the message that we're communicating with behaviors that it is that we're following? There was a neat thing that the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art did relative to communications. My wife is a member of that, and they sent us a survey 2 or 3 weeks ago, simply to see, as customers of the museum, what would make us comfortable to go back to the museum and look at their exhibits. And they just had a ton of great questions. It was a pretty short survey, took 15 minutes to fill out, but getting feedback from their customers so that they could make changes to ultimately create an environment where people are comfortable coming back to see that. It's going to be interesting to see how those things roll out over the next several months. I do not think they're open yet, but I think they're preparing to in a month or so. The next big thing to be thinking about is the way that it is that we look at improvement. I've been involved in the field of performance improvement for, 35 years. I started doing this in the early 80s. And when you look at the way that organizations go about it, most of them do a pretty average, mediocre job of getting better. And by that, what I mean is, the way that company A goes about the business of improvement is very similar to what company B, who is also in their industry, goes about the business of improvement. We've all read the same books. Many of us work with the same consultants or similar consultants. And so when we go about doing this, I don't think most people realize the magnitude of improvement that's available. One of the things that I totally believe to be true, it's been published, although I can't say that I've seen a hard study, but really 5% to 10% of the companies in any given field are highly effective at improving. And the rest are really doing typically an okay job. There's a few that are dysfunctional, but most are kind of okay. There's a handful that's highly effective. And so one of the things you got an opportunity to do right now, as your business is going through some transformation, you're going through some changes, is look at the way that we're going about the business of improvement. We could often increase throughput by 50%. I can do a much better job of in the sales process of the way that is we're looking at. Then sales is going to be probably radically changed for organizations that were used to doing sales calls at their customer's company. There's going to be changes that are being made to that. There's changes we could be making to the way we develop new products. One of the things that was so exciting in the startup field, as new startups began to apply lean thinking to their activities, was that whole idea of rapid prototyping, going out and getting feedback from the customers very early in the process and going through a series of iterations for the new products that they were trying to develop. And so the thing they ended up with was often very different from the thing that the founders originally thought it was they should be doing. All of that is improvement. Improvement isn't just something we should be doing in the factory. I could be improving with the way we adopt new technologies. I mean, typically when you look at the way that most organizations roll out a new piece of software, it's IT driven. I haven't really focused on what is the thing that this new information technology is supposed to be doing to help us improve, and are we really focused on using it in a way that helps to make that happen? One of the things we have at AME is this assessment tool that we call the Lean Sensei. It's a free assessment tool. If you go to the AME website and you go under the Honors and Awards tab, you can find it. There's 60 questions. And one of the reasons I think organizations are average, so many are average at improving, is it's very difficult to know what highly effective improvement practices look like. One of the things that I find I found interesting over the years is when we've got, I think, 60 volunteer assessors that participate in AME's Excellence Award activities. And the learning that the assessors do as they go through, and they have an opportunity to see some organizations that are indeed highly effective in improving, and how that brings all of this knowledge that they have together, so they begin to see how the whole system should operate. Well, one of the things we did with the Sensei is in these 60 questions, there's a detailed description, or not detailed, there's a 1-paragraph description of what highly effective practices look like, of what somebody that's on the journey looks like, and what somebody that's just getting started looks like. And so rather than just looking at so many of these models that we have, where there's just a single word there that talks about standard work or policy deployment, there's at least a 1-paragraph description of what that looks like. And I think that could begin to give people a greater appreciation of the depth that it is that they're supposed to be doing to do this. The other thing that we're hoping people will do when they use the Sensei, and it's work, but there's a lot of learning that comes from this work, is after you've scored yourself and you've got a score on it, then if we think we're really good at this, let's go gather some visual evidence from our workplace that supports, if we think we're a 4 or 4.5 out of 5, can I gather a lot of evidence that shows me that yes, we've got a broad breadth of doing this, and we've got a lot of depth in doing this to make it happen. So doing these things could help you to elevate the effectiveness of your improvement activities, and that's one of the things we really should be looking at doing right now. The next, and I'm sure you know this, is it's a new normal. We are not going back to what we used to be. And my new goal should not be to go back to where I was, because to a large degree, that world isn't going to exist anymore. The world is going to be different for what it is that's going on. You're highly likely to experience changes with the way you work with your customers, the way you work with your suppliers. What are things that it is we could be doing? One of the things that so many companies have found, as people that do the value adding work were in the operation, and doing their work activity, the managers were not there. And what they're learning is, if I really equip people with the basic information they need to do their work, if they've got some basic skills, problem solving skills, and they've got a little bit of knowledge about accounting practices to understand some of the performance metrics, that they really don't need the close supervision that it is that we can be doing. And I can take those supervisors and redeploy them to be doing other things inside the organization, working on improvement practices, working on cross-functional activities. And I don't need as much hands-on day-to-day supervision as I had traditionally been doing. I think there's another thing that would be key is taking an opportunity during this window of change to shift my perspective on something that I've heard this thing talked about for 30 plus years, and I am personally totally dissatisfied with the way that I see organizations addressing this. And this next slide I'm going to show you, you have all seen, I guarantee it. So the typical way we're organized is I've got these blue departments, and there's been slides. The first time I saw this slide was Dr. Deming, probably back in 1983. And he shared this slide, and of course, customers get served going from the suppliers across the organization to come to the customer. So intellectually, we are all aware of this. We all know this, but how do most of us manage? We manage by those departments coming down. And the reason we do that is because, number one, we're used to it. And number two, it's the easiest way to manage department. It's the easiest way to manage something, because I can come up with numbers for each of those blue columns. And I want to hold people accountable. And while people typically don't say this, an average organization, the way they're approaching improvement is, I want all of those blue columns to optimize their column. And of course, if each of those pieces are trying to optimize their piece, there is absolutely no way that it is they can be working in harmony going across the organization. So another thing that you could do right now is are we really doing enough to manage from a cross-functional perspective? That visual that I shared with you that Jordan had put together for the request for proposals totally had a process focus with what it was they were doing. Even though he started with his blue column of design engineering, what is it they were doing for our capacity, they were able to transform that graphic into something that went across the organization where purchasing was getting better information and products that were coming up, manufacturing was getting more in alignment for being able to work seamlessly with the design group, and of course sales, which was an important supplier into that process, was able to do a much better job of what is it that we're going to be running across these red channels going through the organization. So take a moment, because all of us have a couple metrics. So we look at on-time delivery, and that's kind of an on-time thing. But do you really have metrics that allow you to harmonize across those blue columns of the ideal way that it is that we could be doing work? I do not want all of those blue columns to optimize, because that is going to drive disruption in what it is that's going on. And so what are some metrics it is that we could use to make this more effective? You'll get a lot more mileage and I think buy-in to the things that is you're trying to improve if we can start to manage. Now, I'm not abandoning the department metrics, but can I do some things with these process metrics that are going to be helping us work more effectively going forward? The next thing, and it permeates all of these action items that I'm talking about, is that everything that we're doing is an experiment. And just the mere fact that I'm thinking that it's an experiment, that it's not something that's permanent, is going to make me more flexible and more open-minded to change. So often we want to nail these things down, and I simply want to move on. One of my favorite quotes from Taiichi Ono from Toyota, I've not commonly seen this shared, but he once said, "I assume that everything is a mess." And if I'm doing that, rather than assuming that this is really good, if I'm assuming it's a mess, I'm automatically thinking about what is it that we could be doing to make this operate. And there's many stories of Mr. Ono where he challenged people to be able to do things better on many fronts. And so that whole idea of assuming that it's a mess, and so our norm is to make it less messy, to make it better, rather than our norm is to assume that, wow, this stuff is all pretty good and we're feeling pretty good about it, and I'm just worried about a few things. It's a different mental way of looking at it. There was a survey that Industry Week released, and it kind of fits with this thinking, maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago now. They were surveying people on just what's happening with the new startups. And one of the questions they asked is, where do you think you are relative to your safety practices? And it was a 5-point scale. And 79% of the respondents said that we were doing an outstanding job, a 5, or we're doing a very good job at a 4 on safety. And if I'm scoring myself a 5 or a 4 in safety, I am absolutely not operating thinking that it's a mess or thinking that it's an experiment. I'm thinking that, man, we nailed safety, and let's move on to some of these other things that it is we need to focus on. And the problem with that is it's impossible. It's impossible for anybody to be better than a 3 on safety right now for the new protocols. We have no idea what's going to happen with this damn virus moving forward. The government regulations are continuing to change as people are trying to figure things out. There's a lot of things that are happening in the science community with analyzing what's happening with the virus. Our business is going to be changing as time goes by. And so to think that we're anything better than a 3, I've got the wrong mindset. And so that whole idea of the way that it is we're thinking about this is critically important to being able to improve effectively moving forward. Another thing that we could be looking at is what is it that we should keep doing? What is it that we should stop doing? It's usually a really hard decision for businesses to be making, but we've got a wonderful opportunity to be going back and say what is it that we should stop doing, because you probably do not have the capacity to do everything that it was that you used to do. And so a simple way to do this is an 80-20 analysis. Illinois Toolworks is a master within using this particular analytical tool. But typically 20% of what it is that you're doing is creating 80% of the results. 20% of your customers, or in all likelihood 70% to 80% of your revenues, your profits. There's a book that was written by Byrne. I can't remember his first name, but he talked about, the book was Islands of Profits in a Sea of Red Ink. And so just going through and trying to figure out what is it that's vital, that's important for us to keep doing, and what are some of the things that it is that we should stop doing, can be very powerful. One of the things I would look at is what is it that's generating cash today, and what is it that we're doing that's using cash, and how can we take that into account in the decision making that it is that's going on and do something better. And it's a neat analytical way to display this. And when you start to show this, you can get some buy-in to get people to start to agree to make changes to things that I might have thought it was important, but when I can see these facts, it gets easier for me to shift it. The other thing I believe is going to be happening is over the next 3 years, maybe the next 5 years, we are going to see a ton of innovation as a result of this pandemic. I mean, so many organizations have just jumped up and started doing new things. O.C. Tanner right away started to make the safety shields for people in healthcare. But then one of their engineers realized he could take a 3D printer and he could make a device that would pump air underneath that mask to give fresh air underneath the mask to make it less likely for a healthcare provider to contact the virus. So many organizations have moved into making things for the healthcare field. And the neat thing from a mental model is as I start to do that changes that changes my mindset. It changes the culture of the organization, that we become more receptive to innovating moving forward. And so continuing to do some things to support innovation, going back and talking about, you could use the complexity analysis to further what it is you're trying to do there. But what are things that it is we can do to continue to do this? Cisco, a distribution company, was going to roll out this new piece of software. They thought it would take them, I think a year and a half to develop it. And when the virus hit, and there were so many changes going on within the restaurant and the grocery store industry, that within 7 days, they rolled out a new piece of software, the 80-20 rule, that did 80% of what the full 1 year design would have been. So I just think this spirit of what it is that's going on now is making it more receptive for us to be able to do this. And let's make certain that you're doing some things within your business to take advantage of that, and don't lose that flame. Keep that thing do some things to nurture it. There is an article from McKinsey that you might want to reference. I'm not going to talk about it here, but they published something called Rev Up Your Growth Engine, lessons from companies that during cycle changes outperform the rest of the industry. And they just talked about a few ideas of looking for less market opportunities that are not quite so cyclical, moving into adjacent industries, so that if I'm serving, like if I'm in the oil and gas industry, one example they talked about is there was an organization that was able to move that to selling something in the maritime industry. So are there things that it is you can do to expand the services that we want to keep, that vital 20%? Are there things we can do there to take that to new places? And of course, are there things that it is we can be doing beyond our home markets? Although that's probably a little bit of a challenge in today's environment with what's going on. The next thing is the people side. When people ask me what's my definition, or what do I think a leader's primary responsibility is, the thing I will typically say is your job as a leader is to create an environment where people can do their best work. And do you know how well you're doing that? Do you know what it is that's happening? And what happened, what caused me to move in this direction more is years ago, I had an experience with a woman named Pearlie. And one of the things I'm certain you've read is people talk about driving fear out of an organization. How can we have less fear in what it is that we're doing? And I knew that you didn't want to have some abusive manager that was driving fear inside. But what I didn't think about was the subtle stuff that was there. And this happened to me in the early 1990s. And it changed my life. Pearlie gave me a total gift. And so I was teaching people in her organization how to do Kaizen teams. And we had done a Kaizen team on a line where Pearlie worked, made a lot of neat changes. We'd presented to management. Everybody loved what it was that we had done, gotten positive feedback, and we're back in the room just debriefing. And a question I'll ask teams a lot of times is, well, you invested a week of your life doing this. What did you get out of it? And everybody said stuff, very nice stuff. And we came to Pearlie. And Pearlie said, I worked for this company for 25 years. It's the first time they ever asked me to think. And I really liked it. And at first I was proud. I mean, I thought, oh my gosh, I was here. I was able to help this thing happen for Pearlie. But then just reflecting on it right then, what I realized was, here's this woman. She's been working in this place for 25 years, and this organization has taken zero advantage of it. And even worse, what they've done is they've created an environment where Pearlie and the 349 other Pearlies that work in this organization, that they're reluctant to come forward with with an improvement idea because they think they won't be respected, but they think that their manager might be threatened by the concept that they're coming up with an improvement idea or challenged. And so they've got this culture that isn't promoting this. The other depressing fact was that next week, how likely is this organization, this leadership team, to have changed its culture where it's going to continue to encourage even Pearlie, let alone the 349 other people, to encourage Pearlie next week to continue to come forward with her ideas. And how that changed my life was I didn't realize there was this hidden fear that was there. Intellectually, I understood that people get threatened when people suggest ideas, but the emotional toll that it took place on people, I did not grasp that. And when Pearlie gave me this gift, it changed the way I did my work to this very day. But as we were consulting, I was consciously aware of what do we need to be doing to unleash the power of the talents that are there. So the challenge for you is, are we really creating this environment where people can do their best work? Are you challenging yourself? Are you trying to change your perspective? If you think you're doing a great job, fine, but you could probably do a better job. And so are you doing some things within your organization on a periodic basis to assess how are we doing this and how can we do a better job of creating a better environment moving forward in the future? I would guess that most of us would admit that people are a key part of making most of these things happen. And this is a key component that often gets done in the average organization. We do this in a shallow way, where I will let Pearlie, submit her ideas, and we'll act on those ideas. But I'm not really creating an environment to encourage that on an ongoing basis. The next one, and I know there's been a couple of webinars that have been done on this, so I won't spend a lot of time on it. But it's looking at our supply chain. All the way back when I started doing this stuff in the 80s, it was called total quality management. And you could not name a 3-letter improvement program that I've not done over the last 30 years. But we always talked about single source supplying, but none of us, when we were talking about that, ever thought about single source supplying from a company halfway around the globe. Yet so much of the outsourcing that we were doing to single sources was exactly that. And some of the prices of that people are starting to encounter today. And I'm not anti going to China or anti going to anywhere else, but I am anti doing things that are foolish. And so are we really thinking about total cost in a holistic way? There's a neat survey that Harry Mosher had put together from the Reshoring Institute. And there's a link here that you can use, and these slides will be shared. But Harry's got a really neat model that he put together for looking at the total cost of ownership. Fits very closely to some work I had done in the 80s and 90s on understanding total cost. And I suggest you might want to take a look at that, looking at things you might be wanting to outsource, although so many people are insourcing today. And the other neat thing with the changes going on in so many companies is I think you can start to look for some non-traditional suppliers that are closer physically to you that might be interested in meeting your needs. And if you can shrink that distance of where things are taking place, it could be powerful. There's so much that's going on, but one of the things we should do is avoid the temptation to adopt the easy solutions. I mean, the old expression, if it's worth doing, it's worth doing right. So going back, talking about the improvement process, oh my God, we don't have time to do this with all the panic that's going on. Do not forego some of these things that are important to your long-term health, for short-term gains. Yes, it would have been nice momentarily if some of us had built up a whole stock of particular inventory components, possibly during this virus, but you do not want to be doing that as an ongoing basis. Increasing your inventory is not the way to solve the problem. Reimagining and redoing your supply chain is a way to address some of these problems. The next big change that's likely to be coming our way is going to be climate change. I don't care if it's man-made or natural causes. The climate is changing. And if we think the refugee problem is problematic today, the refugee problem is the climate continues to change with low-lying places is going to be phenomenal. It's going to be much bigger than the crisis of the moment. Starting to look at right now, climate change and anything else that could be impacting your business. What are some things that it is that we can be doing to address that now would be powerful. And it's funny, when I wrote the article, one of the things I got the biggest pieces of feedback on was people had not thought about hiring new talent. If you go back 4 months ago, most of us were struggling with being able to find highly capable, talented people. They are available now. We lived in Chicago for many years before we moved to just outside of San Francisco. In Chicago, they had something called M-Hub, which is a manufacturing hub. There is the 1812 building that's over in the Merchandise Mart. There's all these business incubators. A lot of these young people that were trying to start these new businesses are going to be floundering at the moment. I would absolutely be going to these places, to the incubators. And are there some people there that they know are now looking for work? I would also be talking to, there's a lawnmower outside, I apologize for that. I would also be looking at companies that are geographically near you. And if they had to do a headcount reduction, are there some people that they were really reluctant to let go that they would like to help get a new job, and see if you can pick up some super talent really quickly and actually really cheaply. It wouldn't require a lot of executive search to be able to do that. And then finally, and quickly, the digital revolution, we've been talking about this for a long time. It's arrived. It's just been amazing with the restaurants that were used to just serving meals there in the restaurant, and how many of them were able to move to I'll make it at the restaurant, I'll deliver it to your house. I mean, talk about a radical change that's going on there. The idea of using digitization across the supply chain, where it is that you can be following, once the product leaves the supplier, there's all sorts of things that it is I can be doing to tracking where that's at, what it's going on. What I should be doing with these things, though, is not just going out and doing an artificial intelligence experiment, but what are the things we want to be doing with digital to improve the way we operate? And so the key thing is not adopting the new technology. The key thing is the improvement we're trying to make. For any of you that have been using Google Glass, just using one example, it's been so impressive. I was able to experiment with that. And so if I've got Google Glass and I'm doing a task, if I had a problem doing that task the last time I did this job, the Google Glass can know that it's supposed to give me more detailed instructions for doing that task this time. Or if I've got an inexperienced operator, that person might get more detailed instructions. If I've got a highly experienced operator that has not been having problems, they've got a very high level checklist for what it is they're doing. There's just amazing things that it is that we can be doing that I think we will find really useful moving forward. And with that, I'm probably moving close to the time I should wrap up. I will hang around for questions for anybody that has them. Jeff?
Thank you, Michael. Anyone who has questions, you can feel free to put them into the Q&A box. I know we had someone raise their hand earlier in the call, but I wasn't sure if that was to indicate that they had a question. So if you use the Q&A box, that will help us go through those and answer them as they come.
Well, there's only 13 participants too. I mean, we could
Yep.
just open it up and let them, we can unmute them, let them ask a question if they have one. I will stop sharing.
Yeah, if you raise your hand, I can't mass unmute, but if you use you can either type into the Q&A function, or you can use the raise your hand ability. Got a little feedback. People are
Thanks,
thanking
Carlos. Yeah, and if anybody has a question they want to email me, my email was there in the last slide, but feel free to send that to me.
Yeah, and if you're interested in seeing the original article on which this was based, and even though the content has been updated, you can find that at ame.org. That's where that article appeared. I do not see any questions coming in.
Yeah. All right.
Okay.
Well, hopefully that was useful.
Yeah, it was very thorough. So, Michael, we definitely appreciate everything that you do for AME and for your wisdom and insights that you shared today. So thank you so much. And thank you to the participants as well. We appreciate having you on. We have been taking these webinars and uploading them to our YouTube page in a webinar playlist. So if you would like to come back and reference this later, that'll be on our YouTube page. You can find a link for that at ame.org, and it'll be right on the homepage of YouTube. So this webinar, as well as several others, including a webinar that Michael did for us earlier in the pandemic response, where it was talking about assessments and if the timing would be right for doing those now. So you can find all of those by going to YouTube through our ame.org website. We also have a number of upcoming events, which I encourage you to participate in. You can find those at ame.org/events. And with that, we'll conclude our webinar today. Thanks again for participating, and thank you, Michael, for your leadership.
Take care.